Hello, I'm Stuart Craner, co-founder of Thinkers 50 and director of the Business Ecosystem Alliance, a partnership between Thinkers 50 and the Higher Model Research Institute. Thank you for joining us for this session on the new frontier for ecosystems. If you'd like translation into Japanese or Mandarin, please click the language button at the bottom of the screen. As you know, ecosystems are at the heart of Hayer's philosophy of Rendanheyi. They are a powerful but challenging way of thinking of and configuring organizations. They challenge the neat and tidy linear org charts of the past and offer a more realistic interpretation of the multiplicity of stakeholders involved in the work of any organization in the digital age. Joining me to shed new light on ecosystems are a stellar trio of thinkers: Marshall Meyer, Jeff Kuhn, and Mark Greeven. Marshall is an emeritus professor of management at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. Jeff is a researcher, executive advisor, and educator focused on enterprise strategy, leadership, transformation, and banyan trees. More of that later. Mark Greeven is a professor of innovation and strategy at IMD in Switzerland. Our format today is that each of the speakers will offer their insights for 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have a discussion. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to send them in the chat box or the question box along the way, and I will be sure to relay them. First, let me offer the virtual stage to Marshall Meyer.
Good morning. Stuart, thank you for the kind introduction. The presentation today is titled Realizing Hayer's Internet of Clothing, and I'm going to go to screen share to get my deck up there. I think this should work okay. Can everybody see that deck? There we are.
Yeah, it's
terrific. Okay, terrific. So a caveat here, as most of you know, or many of you, at least many of you know, I've worked with Hayer for almost 2 decades. In fact, it is 2 decades this year. And some of what I'm saying is going to be, if not Hayer specific, specific to firms and firms whose ecosystems are in fairly mature industries. This is not a tale of Silicon Valley. Hayer's core business remains household appliances, and their ecosystem in this presentation, Realizing Hayer's Internet of Clothing, are folks in the clothing, home textile, detergent, and closely related industries. So let me proceed. Let me proceed if I can here. Okay, so I want to start with the vision of what Hayer calls the Internet of Clothing, which is now encompasses much, if not all, of their washing machine business. The entire Internet of Clothing, or what I'll call the IOC, encompasses the full life cycle of clothing, including design, manufacture, distribution, care and storage of clothing, largely in the home, though it could be in commercial laundries also, or community laundries, and finally, disposal, recycling of clothing. The first 3 stages are fairly well developed, facilitated by computer-aided design, also by RFID tagging, hanging tags largely, tags on the hangers for clothing. And Hayer's emphasis, from my perspective, has been largely on the 4th stage, the care and storage of clothing in the home, and parenthetically, community laundries. And this care and storage of clothing in the home, aided or abetted by the internet, is one of the core elements of Hayer's larger smart home strategy. Now, what are the challenges of care and storage of clothing in the home? Well, in terms of clothing care, here's the big pain point. It's the washing machine. Most of you have had this experience. You go online, you go to the store, you pick out an washing machine. If there's a salesperson, they'll tell you about all the features of this machine. It's got 43 cycles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the pain point is which cycle, which program. Most people, you know, kind of set it and forget it. They pick one cycle, it's for everything. And are in fact very, very confused by all the selections offered by the machine. Clothes as a consequence are not always laundered properly. You know, white shirts, yellow, colors fade. These are the big issues in home washing. Getting the right program, the right detergent to keep the whites white and the colors really bright. On the clothing storage side, there's something here. I hope you bear with me for a moment. It's almost funny, but it's not. Look at this. Most people don't know the clothes they own. They have no idea what they own. Here's a quote from a study done by a third-party removal company. Quote, the percentage of clothes that go unworn is a lot higher than most consumers think. Most are, quote, highly delusional about what they own versus what they actually wear. And I'm just going to give you a quick slide on this. If you want the data, I'll get them to you later. Country by country, done by a company called Movinga, based in Germany. All you have to do is look down. Let me see if look down these columns. Percentage of your wardrobe you haven't worn in the last 12 months. Typically, these percentages vary, but typically people say, oh, about a third I haven't worn. In fact, it's about 2/3. People have no idea what's in their closets. And as a consequence, there's a lot of wastage of clothing. A high percentage of clothing, by the way, is just never worn. Either it's not sold or goes from the closet, never on the person, directly to what? The landfill or other means of disposal. Okay, yeah, these, and by comparison, by the way, with food and furniture, there's much more, quote, delusion about clothing than anything else in the household. People just don't know what they've got. All right, now go back a couple of years. Haier initially, and following some really interesting academic studies in China, sought cooperation from the clothing makers. And you know, the aim was really machine readable clothing. That is, clothing when you tossed in the washing machine or put in your closet, think of it as a machine for a moment, could be read by sensors in the washing machine in the closet so that the correct washing program could be selected automatically, or clothes in the closet were A, known, and B, could be sort of sorted into outfits so people had an easy time of deciding what to wear with what. And you know, some of China's best known clothing makers became IOC partners, the Haier Internet of Clothing. Many did not. When you looked at the list of partners, I think that total list was in the order of 35 or so. Don't have it in front of me right now. But most were in the traditional segments of the clothing industry, menswear, particularly children's wear, also makers of home textiles. There was a clear value proposition. The proposition was this: the machine readable clothing was very hard to counterfeit because you could check where it came from. In the case of home textiles, now this applies particularly to hotels, hospitals, you could check whether sheets or towels had been freshly washed, because that would be encoded in the chips embedded in the fabric. However, women's wear was so-so, and certainly the fast fashion and sportswear segments were not at all interested in joining up with Haier's effort to create universal machine readable coding. And the industry structure also made this very difficult. It's a highly fragmented industry. Take a look at this. Look at the China apparel market. 4-firm concentration ratio, 6% last year, tiny. 8-firm concentration ratio, 10.6%. HLA, a menswear maker, huge menswear maker in China. Number 5 in the industry after fast fashion sportswear makers. Is it number 4, number 5? I'm not sure I'm counting right. It's number 4. Sorry about that. 1.4% market share. They were Haier's lead partner in this effort. Brilliant conception. I think the structure of the industry really got in their way, however. Now, let's turn to the subject of today's talk, which is the cartridge washing EMC micro community. It's a small team, 4 people. The leader, Mr. Zhao, worked at Blue Moon, which is one of the large detergent makers in China before he came to Haier. Zhao is also the marketing director of the IOC, which again is a huge component of the washing machine business. The EMC, the micro community, was formed to solve a specific problem: how you clean clothes better and make it easier for consumers to select the correct washing program and detergents. And the solution is something called the Bling Bling washing machine, which utilizes cartridge detergent technology. Now, look, what this does, okay, a little bit of technical language here, if you don't mind. It does 2 things. It keeps colored clothes brighter, white clothes whiter. How does it do it? Stain removal. It basically injects something called proteinase into the washing solution, water plus detergent. Proteinase breaks down protein stains very, very well. The problem is its half-life in the water plus detergent solution isn't very long. So it has to be a liquid and it has to be injected at a precise moment in the cycle. So it requires a special technology to do it. Again, cartridges with liquid injected at the precise time. The same thing for the problem of color. Very, very interesting here. Color dims not because dyes fade, but rather because the surface gets abraded and light doesn't diffuse very well. And so in order to fix the abrasion of the cellulose on the surface, you use something called cellulase, which will clean up the surface. And in some of the promotional videos from Haier, you've got little bits of cellulase going around there, snipping off the damaged cellulose, and off it goes down the drain. But again, same problem with cellulase as with proteinase. Doesn't remain active for very long, must be injected in liquid form at just the right time. So I'm going to try to show you how the washer actually works. Let's hope this works on my screen. I'll click on this guy, see what we get. Here we go. 为达到更好的洗护，有人研发洗涤剂，有人改进洗衣机，但对的事不能只做一半。海尔布灵布灵彩妆机横跨2大行业，原装 B-Box 彩妆盒独立分仓，发挥酵素活性，智慧配剂，一亮投放，绽放衣物亮彩，一键装彩就要本色。Okay, so you heard the bling bling at the end there, right? Okay, now here's what's so interesting about the bling bling. It's based on a conventional washing machine. It's modified, so it's not all that expensive to produce. Currently requires manual selection of fabric. You can do it on the machine on some models. It'll offer you 20-some selections. You can download other programs from the cloud via an app. Water quality is programmed automatically based on location of the machine. That part is easy. Okay, now look what happened though. Here's what's so interesting. The Bling Bling was introduced December 31st last year, say the beginning of this year, 2021. They're not cheap, 4,500 to 8,000 RMB. And they sold 78,000 of them in the first half of this year. That's a lot. More importantly, perhaps, the mix of sales has shifted from online to offline. People are coming into stores to look at them. Always a positive sign. And then people buy whole suites of appliances, which Haier calls scenarios. The Casardi brand, Haier's upscale brand, will adopt the cartridge technology, the B-Box, very soon. And it's possible that this technology will be also adapted to dishwashers, although the cartridges physically would be different. Now look, these cartridges are sold not exclusively, but increasingly on a subscription model like printer ink. In some of the ads, it says actually ink detergent cartridge. People make the connection in their heads between printers that automatically order ink and now the Bling Bling that automatically orders detergent. The price to consumers is very competitive with high quality detergents, but the profit margin for the detergent makers is much higher, roughly 30% rather than 10% when you go through retail distribution. And until last month, a Haier-owned brand called Fabricare was the only source of replacement cartridges and cartridge refills, whether by subscription or retail or better online through places like JD. But look what happened. August 25th, the Guangzhou Libi Enterprise Group entered into partnership with Haier. Libi will manufacture and distribute detergent cartridges compatible with the Bling Bling cartridge system with the B-Box. Libi is the largest maker of detergents in China. And there haven't been further announcements, but as you can imagine, it's likely that other major detergent makers are going to follow suit, follow the example of Libi, which is #1 in the industry. Now, take a look at the China laundry care market. For firm concentration ratio, 58.7%, not 6% as in apparel, 59%. 8 firm concentration ratio, 75%. Libi at 17.9% is the IOC's first cartridge washing partner, again, the largest maker of detergents in China. Very, very different industries, as you can tell. So finally, realizing the IOC, I don't say inventing, I don't say creating, this is like a realization, making something come true. And it's a simple comparison. Again, the caveat, I think this is limited to fairly mature industries. Comparison of the original IOC and the cartridge washing EMC suggests 3 conditions where ecosystems most readily emerge. 1, a technology or a platform offering a strong value proposition. Now, there's value for the consumers. You get cleaner clothes, you get brighter clothes, but there's also, I want to point out, value for society. If clothes stay cleaner, they stay brighter longer, you're going to use and dispose of fewer of them. I asked Mr. Zhao his estimate of the savings in clothes, and he said 20 to 30%. That is huge. Second value proposition for ecosystem partners. Again, detergent makers' margins will increase as they shift from retail to subscription or direct distribution. That's really important. They have an incentive to join up. And third thing here, and I want to point out, may be controversial, I'll be interested in the conversation, is industry concentration. Ecosystem partners from concentrated industries can more readily observe each other and agree on standards than firms in highly fragmented industries. Again, compare the apparel industry and the detergent industry. The apparel industry is highly fragmented, both in terms of producers and distribution channels, whereas the detergent industry is quite concentrated. So that's my pitch, that's my presentation. Look forward to the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marshall. I'm not sure my clothing delusional level is very high at all, but really amazing where this is going. It feels like detergent cartridges are the industry's Nespresso moment. Also striking how small the team is, which ignited this, like only 4 people. Thank you very much, Marshall. Next up, we have Jeff Kuhn, who will be talking banyan trees, amongst many other things. Jeff, thanks for joining us, and over to you.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Stuart. Let's see here. Let's screen share and we'll be good to go. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Good. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Stuart, for the kind introduction. And
Jeff,
I'm sorry.
Not yet.
Yes.
Can't see you.
Can't see my screen. Okay. 1 second. How about now?
No, not yet.
Okay. Let's see. Can Mark perhaps jump in while I get organized here on my side? I apologize.
Okay. You good to go, Mark?
Good to go.
You're always good to go. I know that. Mark is a professor at IMD in Switzerland and is currently in Dubai. So the stage is yours now, Mark.
Thank you, Stuart. So, and great to be here together with Marshall and Jeffrey, and looking forward to our discussion afterwards as well. So, I was lucky to be on a venture to China, starting 15 years ago in 2005, to study innovative companies, and I ended up studying lots of emerging ecosystems, from Alibaba to Haier to Ping An and others, and then I figured, like, this is really fantastic, but what are we going to do with all this knowledge, and can we bring that actually to existing incumbents in other parts of the world? So that brought me actually to try to find sort of the secret recipe, if you like, of ecosystems, particularly very focusing on how to apply some of those ideas. Now, when we work, and of course at IMD we work with a lot of large organizations, and the typical thing when we work with large organizations, multi-divisional structures, matrix organizations, we hear typically one thing is like, oh, everything is complex. We have lots of decision-making protocols and processes, and it's we're not always as quick as we want to be, and complexity is literally everywhere. So then Mark comes in and says, what you should do. Have you considered building an ecosystem? Because, there's so much power in leveraging partners for building an ecosystem. You can do much more, and you can co-create your future together with others. And then sometimes, well, not sometimes, very often the response is, oh no, that's even more complex. My already complex world became even more complex. So what did we do? And what did we do at IMD? We said, let's look at some of the companies that apparently have worked out how to reduce that complexity and expand into ecosystems without making the life of executives and leaders endlessly complex. And of course, the hunt started with Haier, because it is one of the most fascinating companies to study and to work with, and try to figure out what is some of that, what did they do to prevent that life becomes so complex that working with partners and working in ecosystems of dozens, hundreds, and sometimes thousands of other third-party players and third-party suppliers, how we're going to do that. And then we find out there is some sort of a secret recipe, and I don't think it's the only part of the story, and I don't think it's the only recipe that is out there, but it is a recipe that we find in a lot of other organizations, and we're also going to share some of those with you. So one of the things that you realize when you dive into Haier is they have all these micro enterprises, lots of small businesses and small organizations everywhere, and it's in the thousands, right? It's amazing. If you think about it, it's thousands of small mini companies that are part of this Haier ecosystem. And then on top of that, there's a whole group of external companies and suppliers and partners that are all connected to this Haier platform. So then the question I was like, if I'm a small company and I, of 10 or 15 people and micro enterprise in, let's say, marketing or new product development, how do I know stuff? How do I know where to find a talented person? How do I know, if I need to book a meeting room in the building, where do I go? Because, I'm autonomous and independent as a little enterprise, but obviously I have lots of resource, information, and communication needs. And what we find out is that actually really a large number of internal, let's call them shared digital services or internal platforms that have been facilitating the communication and coordination between all these different micro enterprises, but not only inside Hire as an organization, but also outside of Hire. So some examples here on the slides are the Cosmoplot platform, which is relatively well known, which is basically a coordinating mechanism for the industry to build smart manufacturing solutions and pull in and get together all kinds of resources. We have, of course, the Hope Innovation Platform, which sole purpose is, to leverage the collective intelligence of the masses and, get great ideas inside, but also do that in a really clever way for people that work inside Hire or inside the ecosystem. Now, in the upper right, and apologies for a slightly grainy picture, but this is a screenshot of an HR analytics tool. And in particular, there's this one little thing in that HR analytics tool that they have, which is called HR Big Data Analytics, which is an amazing tool that allows people in micro enterprises, so some of those thousands of small companies in Hire, to actually find people inside, to recruit to work for them, or outside of Hire's ecosystem, and know what are their capabilities, what can we do. So we see that Hire has been really quite successful, not only in bringing a new philosophy of how to rethink the way we organize, but also found very practical ways and leveraging digital technologies, digital tools, shared services and platforms to actually solve one of the bigger problems if you are a very large company, which is reducing the complexity of working together. And I think this is fascinating, and it has always remained fascinating. Now, when then we were looking at sometimes we come into a classroom or we work with executives and they say, yeah, Mark, that's nice, but that's just Hire. You cannot come up with the next example. So then what we do, we went on and we studied another company, fantastic company in the south of China called Ping An. Really interesting business, insurance, right? Completely different field, professional financial service industries. And actually, this company is not only probably one of the largest or the largest insurance company in the world, it also runs two of the most impressive digital platforms, one in digital healthcare called Ping An Good Doctor, and another one which is called Lufax, which is actually one of the largest wealth management platforms out there. They build an ecosystem around insurance and financial services that goes all the way to healthcare, wealth management, and believe it or not, even secondhand cars and real estate. So how they built that and not went crazy with the complexity of that business, just imagine all the regulatory conditions around that as well. They actually launched a company which is called Ping An Technology, which you could say is an incubator of all of those types of shared services and platforms that glue together all of those business processes within the group, but also between Ping An, their partners, and their customers. So very interesting, slightly different approach than Hire, but a similar logic. Then, we have more critics. They come in and they say, this is nice, but that's China. And I hear this often. And I spent 15 years living and working in China. And every time I went back to Europe, they say, yeah, that's China. That's never going to work anywhere else. And then I say, no. Let's look further. So went to work on with a company called Bayer, which is Bayer's particular division on crop science. And what they do is really simple. It's not simple, don't get me wrong, it's very complicated. But what they do is they sell seeds to farmers, so to grow crops. And they started to work with all kinds of partners. They think about fertilizer companies, drone companies, training, right? Farmers need training. Not every farmer knows how to farm. Even insurance companies. And that could be massively complex. But actually one of their secret recipes is a platform or an application called FieldView. It's actually a company that they acquired and refurbished, which is playing the role similar to some of those digital shared service we find in Hire and in Ping An, but now in the case of farming and seeds and insurance. So very interesting, we found similar concept of how do we reduce the complexity of us working with ecosystem partners and do that in a way that does not drive our leadership and our employees crazy and add to their complexity. Now, then we have the last set of critics that say, you know, this is all nice, but that's only for really big companies. And, you know, a small company cannot build really an ecosystem and it's never going to work out. Now, and then I was lucky to be in Switzerland at some stage and work with a company called Mammut, which is it's not a massive company. It's a medium-sized company, maybe $100-something million business. And they make gears for people that love to walk in the mountains. So it's a mountaineering equipment company. They also realized that, you know, when you walk in the mountain, you need a lot of other stuff. You know, you need to go to which mountain, how to climb the mountain. Perhaps you want to share it, you want to be part of the community. So very quickly, they realized, you know, actually, we need a lot of ecosystem partners to satisfy the complex needs of my consumers. And then they also realized that's really complicated if I need to organize it because I don't have so much manpower. I only have small teams. I don't have a lot of resources for that. Now, and then they actually did exactly the same at a much smaller scale as what we've seen with the big guys. And that is they actually launched a little mechanism called Mammut Climb Bags, which is a little application that connects them, so the company, to their customers, but also to a range of their partners. For instance, partners in social communities, routing, tourism agencies, and all of that. So very interesting story how a smaller company also managed to do that. And we actually wrote down this story in the book that is being launched. So have a look at that if you're interested in the story. We work with the CEO there. So if you look at this whole picture, you know, you could say, you know, what's the secret sauce for your ecosystem? And I hope that you feel that I'm hinting at that, you know, for an ecosystem to not become extremely complex to manage, to organize, or better to say, to orchestrate, perhaps there needs to be a layer somewhere in between you as a company and your ecosystem partners that also connects to your customers. And I think we've seen with Hire a wide variety of really, really interesting solutions. Same for Ping An, even for Bayer and a smaller company like Mammut. Now, I could, of course, stop here, and don't worry, Stuart, I will stop in 20 seconds. But, you know, the real secret recipe, of course, is something that is behind all of those shared digital services and platforms that connect the ecosystem together. But, you know, I'm not going to tell you the real story because you can read that in an article that we just published with Sloan. And this is all about microservices. And that's actually what is all behind the bigger secret recipe that really connects and glues together an ecosystem. So with that, thank you for this. I wanted to talk about complexity and reducing complexity, and hopefully this gave some interesting food for thought. Back to Stuart.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Mark. A lot of food for thought. I like the idea of the Hope Innovation Platform. It's got a nice ring to it altogether. Check out Mark's article in Sloan Management Review, and Mark very helpfully mentioned the Power of Ecosystems ebook, which Jeff Kuhn has also contributed to. And there's a link in the chat box so you can download your complimentary copy of the book. And the book's just come out and it's available in Mandarin as well. And now we will return back to Jeff. Hopefully you can now share your screen with us, Jeff.
Okay, how are we doing there?
Oh, yes.
You can see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, well, sorry for that false start there. Hit the wrong button, who knows? Anyhow, so Stuart, thank you so much for the kind introduction. And hello, everybody. It's quite an honor to be here with you today. And so I'm Jeffrey Kuhn, and as Stuart shared, my research, writing, teaching, and advisory work is in the realm of enterprise strategy, leadership, and transformation. So by nature, I'm a zoom out panoramic thinker. As you're going to see in a minute, I'm also an expert, as Stu had mentioned, in banyan trees. And so today I thought I would share some thoughts with you concerning this idea of strategic leadership in the age of ecosystems. And let's advance the slide. Here we go. All right. So for background, like Mark and Marshall, I'm also a research fellow at Hire. So back in 2019, I had the honor of conducting in-person research at Hire on behalf of the Columbia Business School. And I visited Qingdao in February of that year, literally during the Spring Festival, Chinese New Year, and then had the opportunity to visit Shanghai in September of that year. And my research, like my colleagues, it consisted of interviews with the cross-section of micro enterprises. I had the opportunity to observe operations, so the smart factories and the Cosmoplast Industrial Internet Center, et cetera. And then I also had the opportunity to engage in strategic dialogue with higher executives, including Mr. Zhang, which was, for me, a life-changing event. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then after I concluded my research, I chronicled my findings in a case study for MBA students for use at the Columbia Business School, where I have a relationship. In terms of preparation, so I was familiar with Hire through the business journals, like most people, but not at a deep enough level to engage executives in an insightful two-way conversation. So to prepare for my trip, I read probably a foot-high stack of articles on Hire, every case study ever written, every article ever written on Hire. Read probably 5 or 6 books on Hire, including Bill Fisher's great books on reinventing giants. And so I wanted to take a deep dive into the organization's history, its micro-enterprise model, this concept of zero distance, value co-creation, touch points, all the exciting concepts that we're exploring at this conference. But right away in my literature review, I found that Hire's innovative management model, micro-enterprise concept, they were already well covered by other researchers in the literature. So I opted to break new ground and explore Hire through the prism of strategic leadership. So you can see from my research question here that I framed for my field research at Hire. So I was interested specifically in addressing the question of what strategic leadership looks like in a Hire type context as compared to a conventional hierarchical organization that's optimized for equilibrium. So I was interested in that contrast. All right, let me move to the next slide here. There we go. Okay, so when I arrived in Qingdao for this would have been February 2019 for my first week of research, Hire was literally in the early stages of transitioning from its platform structure to its present day ecosystem model. So as a researcher, the ground was literally shifting under my feet. And candidly, I struggled to find what I call my strategic true north, which for me is an identifiable core business to anchor my thinking. So in my interviews, I was thinking in terms of core versus beyond the core growth, transformational growth, new ventures, et cetera, et cetera. But eventually I realized that Hire, like Amazon and many other 20th, first century firms, tend to be bound together by a central idea rather than a core business per se. And that was new thinking for me. But here's where it gets interesting. So you can see the photograph here. This is a photo I took during the first 5 minutes of my visit at Hire at its global headquarters. So during my visit, my trip started with a tour of the lobby of the executive building. And I had the most wonderful guide. And she paused in front of the banyan tree that's pictured here and explained how the tree's downward growing branches spawn new roots and trunks when they touch the ground. So in other words, these banyan trees are able to self-propagate themselves. And as a result, they're considered a symbol of immortality in Eastern culture. Pretty awesome stuff. So let's just put this in perspective, though, this mighty banyan tree. So the great banyan tree outside of Calcutta, India, so it's believed to be over 250 years old. It has 4,000 root/trunk structures, and its canopy spreads over 165,000 square feet. So it's a massive tree. It's a whole ecosystem in itself. Now, here's where it gets interesting. So in my travels, I've traveled all over the tropics all around the world. I've seen many banyan trees in my travels, and my wife is actually from Miami, and her family had a banyan tree in their backyard. But I'm actually from Pittsburgh in the northern part of the U.S. in the industrial heartland. We had lots of smokestacks, but not too many banyan trees. I didn't know they were called banyan trees. I just figured that they were exotic trees from the tropics. I didn't know they had downward growing branches that propagate new roots and trunks, et cetera, et cetera. So this was all new for me. I've seen it before, but didn't really know what they were or what they could do. So just picture yourself. So I'm standing there with my guide in the lobby in utter awe of this banyan tree. And at the time, I appreciated the cultural significance as a symbol of immortality in Eastern culture, but I didn't fully grasp its strategic significance at Hire until several months later. So after I completed my research, I was in heavy monk mode for several months, I think 3 to 6 months actually, to work through this case. When it dawned on me that the banyan tree was in fact a metaphor for Hire's propagation-based growth model. And it was in fact an important symbol of the firm's regenerative capacity. So, and this has huge implications in the age of ecosystem. So let me just kind of show you my logic flow here. So basically the banyan tree at Hire symbolizes its propagation-based growth model. And propagation-based growth enables autopoiesis. Say that 3 times. So in other words, self-organization, self-creation, and evolution to occur. And this autopoiesis, which was the focus of last year's conference, is this, in Taoist terms, the vital force of organizational self-renewal. So therefore, in this age of ecosystems, a key role of strategic leaders is planting these banyan trees, which is an interesting growth model. So, and then my realization was 3 months, 6 months after this experience in the lobby here, when I look back on this experience, the answer to my research question, it was right in front of me, but it was in plain sight because I lacked the right metaphor or mental construct to perceive it. So as an enterprise strategist, I'm well-versed in classic growth models. So McKinsey horizons of growth and this idea of ambidexterity, growth from the core, growth beyond the core, et cetera. But for me, this notion of a propagation-based growth model opened a new vista of thinking. And it dovetails beautifully with my writings in this idea of this self-renewing enterprise. And so that was a biggie for me. Let me advance my slide here. There we go. Okay, so to pull this all together, so as my experience with the banyan tree illustrates, metaphors in business are very important. Language, lens, metaphors, worldviews. And as a leader, you won't be able to see an ecosystem, let alone perceive its dynamic elements without the right metaphor and business worldview. So if you look on the right side of my page here, as my 2x2 chart illustrates, it's impossible to lead a digital age ecosystem with an industrial age mechanistic worldview. So an ecosystem is not a machine. You can't break it into parts to understand how it works. There's no levers to pull. There's no gears to grease. There's no flywheels to spin. There's only seeds to plant, soil to nourish, and interactions to orchestrate. Darwin takes care of everything else. So it's a much different way of leading an enterprise here. And what I found in my research across a span of industries is that the mechanistic worldview of the industrial era continues to cast a very long shadow over the way we think about organizations and lead them. So a company can spend years benchmarking and trying to mimic Hire, but these efforts won't bear any fruit without a leadership worldview that's steeped in this ecological systems perspective here. So let me thank you here. And so it's been quite an honor sharing a snippet of my thinking. And like Mark, if I had you on the edge of your seat wanting more, you can read my essay in the Power of Ecosystems book. It's called Planting Banyan Trees, Strategic Leadership in the Age of Ecosystems. It's on page 103. So how's that for a plug? So Stuart, once again, thank you for the opportunity to speak today, share my thinking, and I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Thanks very much, Mark, and thank you to Marshall. Are we getting nearer to really understanding what Hire does and how business ecosystems work? It seems to me we're in kind of a process of discovery. Where are we in that process, Mark?
Yeah, so I think that we're starting to go into a phase where we realize that somehow ecosystems matter as a way of organizing, and that there are all kinds of pieces and components that matter, whether it is in the leadership side or the strategic side, the digital side. I feel that we're kind of like starting to find out what are the puzzle pieces are, and on the way. And I think this is especially when we're trying to do this for other organizations, see, actually how does this all come together? And I think that's where we are at the moment. I think 10 years ago it was more about, why does it matter? And what a strange thing is this? And now it's like, what these people do at Hire, this is really cool, but we need to find all the puzzle pieces.
And Marshall, you've probably known Hire and Jiang Rui Min for longer than anyone in this webinar. How's people's reaction when you talk about Hire? Has that changed over the years, presumably?
Well, it certainly has. I think what comes first to most people's minds is Hire's reach overseas. No one expected, for example, a Chinese brand to acquire and very successfully integrate, again, GE Appliances, itself now a huge company. So I think the ecosystem aspect is not all that widely understood yet. It may be with the Internet of Clothing in China, but I think going forward, folks are going to recognize that a successful product, a successful innovation really has got to rely on partners. You can't do it all yourself. I'd take a little time, but I don't want to flash up a couple of examples of other successful ecosystems. But I think what they have in common is something there at the core. It's a technology, it's an app that adds value for all the players. I think that's the success. Those are the essential ingredients.
It seems to me, talking to the companies which are taking aspects of what Hire, nobody's copied Hire en masse. And it seems to me that in the past, there were single downloadable models of how to run an organization, which companies sought to emulate and copy. Whereas Hire seems to be more of a smorgasbord, that people pick one aspect of it and try and emulate it. So it's a much more fragmented take-up of what Hire does. Does that sound right?
I believe so. That's partly the nature of the publication or publicity process, but it's also, I think, the nature of Hire, perhaps the nature of China, where, hey, just as we saw here, Hire is willing to experiment. What works is adopted or adapted. What doesn't work is treated as learning, and they go on to the next thing. It's much, much harder, I think, for public companies in the West to do that.
Yeah. How big's the Chinese cultural element, Mark? I mean, you spent 15 years there. I mean, it seems to me that the Chinese appetite and capacity to live with ambiguity and complexity is much higher than it is in the West, when we've been brought up in organizations, at least, on certainty and clarity.
I think it's safe to say, and coming from the Netherlands, we're pretty well organized, and we like things to be organized as well. And I think what we see, or what I've observed in China over all those years, and talking to entrepreneurs in particular, I think is this this willingness to try out new things, right? Which is like embrace uncertainty, if you like. And I think this is especially the case when it comes to digital technologies. I think we have to admit that China has been extremely quick and also very widespread to adopt that. But I think there's another element there as well, which is about just pragmatism. I always find that the Chinese entrepreneurs and businessmen are extremely creative in finding solutions to make things work. And sometimes I just think that some of these developments were really not very much by design, but really just by, let's solve this problem, and then, hey, this is actually a good approach, we could try and do it again. So I think that pragmatism, I think, is another element. And that, of course, you find in lots of other cultures as well, to a lesser or more extent. So is it deeply Chinese cultural rooted? I wouldn't probably say that. I think it has a lot more to do with the context, the uncertainty in the context, but a little bit a Chinese source, probably yes.
Yankee Kring's Kleber makes a point saying copy paste no longer works, as the ability to quickly adapt to changing market environments is key. This is a capability that has to be established via learning and training, like training is like a muscle. And she's also pointed out that what High is doing relates back to complex dynamics and systems thinking, which is one of those things that's been around a long time, but has been not wholesomely embraced by organizations. Jeff, you were about to say something.
Yeah, there's definitely no plug and play Six Sigma approach for this type of enterprise. What I found at Columbia when we introduced so my colleague and I shared the case with all the department chairs and key faculty members to quote unquote propagate it like a banyan tree at the business school. The reaction was it was regarded at, now bearing in mind Columbia's 3 miles away from Wall Street, and that speaks volumes there, but it was regarded more as a novelty, an outlier. Because business schools, particularly East Coast, they're still focused on hierarchies and transformational hero leaders. So this idea of letting go and having a bottom-up organization and a banyan tree-based growth model, it's really a novel concept. They're still using 2x2 grids and horizons of growth and the BCG growth matrix and SWOT and things like that. That's the world that they're still in. Orderly, controlled, and stability and equilibrium.
It seems to me every time I meet Jiang Ray Min that he's really an intellectual, and he's interested in ideas, which is completely different to CEOs you meet in the West who don't read books because they're very practical and results oriented. And do you think that's important, Marshall, in what High has achieved, that capacity to play around with ideas and concepts at a very high level?
I agree with that. But remember about Xiao Zhang, his beginning, we have to go back to 1984. His beginning had very little to do with ideas. He demonstrated quite bluntly that he could bring tough discipline to an otherwise unruly SOE workforce, and that this model of rationalizing and organizing, somewhat along Tayloristic lines, the workforce of other SOEs acquired for nothing, I think gave him the credibility, the space in which he could then experiment with ideas. I don't think, certainly not in the US and probably not in China, that any philosopher king could step in as a CEO of a large organization and last more than 24 hours. There's got to be muscle behind that.
There's a good point by John Dobbin, who's watching. It says, I wonder if executives of companies that are tentatively choosing components of Rendanheyi simply lack the bravery and vision of Jiang Ray Min to go the whole way. And I think there is quite a lot of truth in that. Jeff, when you were speaking, I think you said you lacked the right metaphor or mental construct to really understand higher. And it seems to me that we're still in search of a new language and new metaphors, your banyan tree, to really understand what High is doing and the way ecosystems work. So we're still kind of flailing around looking for the language, it seems to me.
Yeah, I think we're still trying to. So I've done a lot of research on the cognitive dimensions, the whole mechanistic thinking and the transition to more ecological ways of knowing, et cetera, et cetera. So done quite a bit of work on that. So what I'm finding in industry after industry is they're still looking at the world, even at Google is looking at the world through a mechanistic lens. How can we control this? How can we get it in a grid? How can we get it in a spreadsheet, et cetera, et cetera. So this organic metaphor is key. It really unlocked for me, and I'm a former jazz musician, so in no way was I a mechanistic thinker. So I understood this idea of emergence, but I really needed the right metaphor to understand Hire's growth model. I the first week felt like our Alice in Wonderland in the rabbit hole. So they had transitioned from platforms to ecosystems. The language was different. Every interview I had, I said, how does this relate to the core, in search of finding an identifiable core? And what I've come to realize, and I had a lot of dialogue with other colleagues, et cetera, concerning Hire's core business. But this RendanheyiOpenTalk is really the dressing of the salad. You know, it's really Hire's based on more of a central idea rather than a core business. Because I would have conversations, well, isn't consumer electronics and home appliances, that's the largest business? Is that the core business? And the answer was, well, not really. We're in the world of better life solutions. So it was a struggle as a Western thinker, steeped in horizons of growth and growth from the core and growth beyond the core and close adjacencies and that sort of world. At Hire, you know, with this propagation-based growth model, the entire enterprise is in a perpetual state of metamorphosis and transformation. So that's what's fascinating about this organism as a new species, so to speak.
But it seems to me perpetual transformation kind of works against human nature. I think our appetite for perpetual transformation as individuals is not that great. Is it? What do you think?
Yeah. We want to think in linear terms of startup growth, mature, a sunrise industry versus a sunset industry, those type of categories. But, you know, Mr. Zhang's all about creating this evergreen enterprise that just perpetuates on itself into infinity, the infinite game.
So where does it go next, Mark? In 5 years' time, what do you envisage we'll be talking about around Hire?
I think that we will still be talking about Hire, and probably about how Hire has then changed remarkably and probably very fundamentally since today, because I think they have been on this journey for since the 1990s, right? So I think there's probably a lot more in their magic box. I also think that at the same time we will see lots of other organizations that have been experimenting and are experimenting as we speak with this idea and some of the ideas of the Hire ecosystem or other versions of ecosystems. And I think we're going to see a little bit more of an ecosystem of knowledge sharing between all of those organizations. So I think by 5 years down the line, I think we'll have we'll be a bit further in trying to find actual applications of this.
Yeah, it's interesting that one of the things Hire has created is an ecosystem of knowledge sharing around the ideas which it propagates. Mm-hmm. Which is quite interesting in itself. Yeah. Marshall, where do you see Hire in 5 years' time?
Anything's hard to predict. Let's acknowledge that. I see them bringing the full Internet of Clothing to fruition. And that means occupying not just the full step 4, carrying, storing of clothes in the home, but extending out on the one hand to production distribution, which they do through some of their subsidiary companies actually, and to recycling. I think we're going to recognize that clothing is a major contributor, believe it or not, both to global warming and to the usage of water. And as in other domains, there's a societal component here that's going to be more and more salient, and I think Hire is going to be a huge player in that.
What about the next cadre of leaders at Hire? Because, I mean, at the moment, Jiang Ruimin is the intellectual cheerleader for Hire and the ideas that it embraces, and he's hugely charismatic and impressive in that. But beyond him, is the cadre of similar intellectual champions, Marshall?
Stuart, you do have the knack for tough questions. Okay.
I'll take that as a resounding yes. So the John Dobbin comments, I want the IOC to find my missing socks, which moves us from the sublime to the ridiculous in one sentence.
That one I'll answer. Okay. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, Our time is up. I would like to thank Marshall Meyer for getting up very early to join us and introduce us to the world of the Internet of Clothing. It's one of those ideas that you want to press pause. As you were going through the slides, I wanted to press pause just to think about how it could change people's lives and people's perceptions. But it's an amazing concept, and ignited by a team of 4 is hugely impressive. Jeff, I really appreciated the metaphors you were pursuing, because I really think a new language is. I've always been perplexed by hire when I visited that I saw Jiang Min give a PowerPoint one year, and then I went the next year, and the PowerPoint was completely different, and the language had changed, and I began to think, well, perhaps it'd been lost in translation, but in fact, he's inventing new language to explain new things they're doing. And it's a perpetual process of improvement and changes in language. And Mark, I think your new piece on microservices in Sloan is really getting to the nub of the issue of ecosystems and what's happening at Hire. So I really appreciate all your insights. Many thanks to Mark, Jeff, and Marshall for joining us. I hope everyone who watched the session live and watches the recording gets as much out of it as I have done. So gentlemen, thank you very much, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stuart.